We are creatures of desire. What we most desire is meaning. What makes us suffer most is a lack of meaning.
The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall. Marital therapist, author, and communications trainer Andrew G. Marshall invites guests from all walks of life to discuss what makes life meaningful.
Hello, I'm Andrew G. Marshall. Welcome to The Meaningful Life. We're available on Apple, Spotify, Podbean, and wherever you find your podcasts. Modern life urges us to push relentlessly forward and to reach for success. The message is always to do more. Anything else is unacceptable. But not only do we never seem to reach the promised land, but the price of winning in life is often losing yourself along the way. My witness today is a clinical psychologist, a researcher, and an author. Ross G. White is a professor of clinical psychology at Queen's University in Belfast and an expert on acceptance and commitment therapy. He's worked with both high-performance athletes and the World Health Organization to reduce stress and distress after a humanitarian crisis. His new book is called The Tree That Bends: How a Flexible Mind Can Help You Thrive. Now, while the normal advice for facing the complexities and setbacks of modern life is to grow resilience, Professor White stresses psychological flexibility. So we'll look later at the difference between psychological flexibility and resilience. But first of all, Ross, I'd sort of like to get a sense of how life prepared you to write this book.
Thank you for the invitation onto the podcast. It's great to have this chat with you, Andrew. Yeah, I was motivated really to write The Tree That Bends following years of clinical work where clients would ask me, are there books that you would recommend? And I was happy to recommend books that I felt complemented the work that we would be doing. And there were books written by great authors like Russ Harris, who, similar to myself, is a trainer of acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, as it's referred to. Russ does fantastic work to really try to break through a lot of the jargon that can be there when clinical psychologists and other practitioners are communicating about psychological concepts. So I was always a big fan of Russ's work. So The Happiness Trap would be a book that I routinely would have recommended to clients. But it struck me that the client group that I was working with, I think, also benefited from the integration of other approaches, such as compassion-focused therapy, which is really purposeful in trying to help us to develop self-compassion so that we can be kind to ourselves and work with that inner critic that we can all struggle with. So I was really motivated to try to integrate ACT with compassion-focused therapy and to put together an accessible book that could be entertaining, dare I say, as well as educating, so that the readership could get a flavour of the work that I felt was really relevant for high-stress, high-performance environments. So yes, that's what motivated me to put The Tree That Bends together. Now, within the book, I also reflect on my own journey with psychological flexibility, and it was an opportunity for me to draw on some of the struggles that I've had to deal with in my life and how psychological flexibility has been helpful for me. So it was important from an authenticity point of view for me to also help the reader understand how this has impacted on my life and how I hope these teachings, these strategies, these techniques can also be helpful for the reader in their life.
So could you give me an example of a personal experience where you've needed to have psychological flexibility?
Yeah, there was a period during the 2015 to 2017 where I was working quite intensively in my university work, which has always sat alongside the clinical work that I do with clients. And this was a time whenever I was having to do quite a lot of international travel, which was fantastic, but also incredibly draining. So I was at a conference in Seville, a beautiful part of Andalusia in Spain, The temperature, I think, was 42 degrees for the 4 or 5 days that I was there. And that temperature was indicative of me reaching boiling point, really, in terms of work-life blend and some of the stress that I was experiencing, and really not taking sufficient care of myself and the relationships in my life. And I think it's fair to say that I had a bit of a breakdown at that point in terms of my ability to cope, my sense of contentment, my sense of fulfillment. I reckoned that was lagging. And I talk about it in the book, Andrew, and I reflect on the need for me really to recognize that relentlessness can be an incredibly important trait, and it can allow us to do incredible things. But being relentlessly relentless will lead to burnout. And that's what I experienced at that time. So it was an opportunity for me really to take stock, to make changes in my life, to really foreground that psychological flexibility and to try to come back in terms of my level of thriving.
Because I'm recognizing a Northern Irish accent, and I'm thinking of my childhood, and Northern Ireland was never off the telly with some bomb going off with sectarian violence. I mean, that doesn't seem to me like a place there was a lot of psychological flexibility.
Yeah. And in spite of it all, life continued. And yeah, I grew up in what are colloquially referred to as the Troubles. 30 years of civil strife in which over 3,000 people were killed. And this was really a result of sectarian violence between largely two separate communities. So there was the Protestant unionist community, generally unionist, and then there was the Catholic, generally nationalist or Republican community. And yeah, bad things happened. And we lived in parallel worlds. We were educated separately from each other. And there were areas geographically within Northern Ireland and large cities such as Belfast where those two communities simply wouldn't mix. So it was quite parochial, it was quite territorial. And in spite of those frictions, those separations, there was also an ability for people to go about their daily lives amidst the chaos that was happening. And my family were always very clear with me that 99.9% of the people within Ireland, the north of Ireland, Northern Ireland, were good people. It was a very small minority of people who were motivated to wreak havoc and to engage in violence. So it was about seeing the other as yourself, recognizing the other within you, and trying to find ways of interacting with other members of the community. So that required great levels of psychological flexibility, because within us, we grew up with this kind of unconscious bias about the other community, about their motives and what was incentivizing their actions. So yeah, being able to go to Queen's University Belfast was a great opportunity for me to interact with people from the other community. That was a time when this segregation in education comes to an end, where you're able to go to a university and live with people from the other communities. So yeah, psychological flexibility is about recognizing the thoughts and beliefs that we might have and holding them more lightly so that we can engage in forms of being and doing that feel important to us. So yeah, psychological flexibility was a big part of my upbringing and my coming to terms with the discrimination, segregation that was happening in Northern Ireland at that time.
I mean, I like the idea of holding the rules lightly. I mean, I think that's going to be an important part of psychological flexibility. Am I right on that?
You are, yeah. And there's a line that I hope will be helpful for the listeners, and it's strong intention, light attachment. Strong intention, light attachment. So be strong in your intention to be true to your values and your sense of purpose, and also be light in getting attached to the idea that you have to cling to that or that it has to be done in a particular way. And I think that's really helpful when it comes to beliefs. That idea of light attachment to beliefs, being able to notice the beliefs without being swept along by them, recognizing that we have beliefs, beliefs don't have us.
So one of the things I thought was interesting reading the book was this idea that the world of high performance athletes, and occasionally I've worked or still do work with them, and the world of the everyday Joe on the street, is actually the mindsets are not that different, that we all have a little bit of that high performance mentality. So help us see the connection between that and how we're all, every one of us, suffering from this sort of driven world.
Yeah, that's a great question. And in the book, I talk about 3 different motivational modes. There's the get mode, there's the threat mode, and then there's the reset mode. Now, I haven't come up with that idea myself. I am standing on the shoulders of giants. I have maybe adjusted the language to make it a bit more memorable, and the rhyme maybe helps. Get, threat, and reset. But get mode is about helping us to strive. It's important for our survival, for the survival of our species and other species, that they're motivated to seek reward, whether that be food, whether that be sexual gratification, whether that be water, whether that be status. Right? It's about being motivated, if you like, to achieve goals. So that's the get mode, which helps us strive. But we also have a threat mode. Again, for our survival, evolutionary psychology, evolutionary biology teaches us that if we are not sensitive to danger or risk, then we were lunch. So we needed to respond appropriately to threat to keep ourselves safe so we could survive. So our threat mode was about surviving. And then the reset mode is about reviving. It's about taking care of ourselves, taking care of those we care about, being cared for, and connecting with the environment beyond ourselves. So the reset mode. And arguably in modern life, our get and our threat modes are highly activated, right? We are being fed with ideas constantly through social media, through the media, about how our lives should be, the status that we should achieve, the things that we ought to have. We are also aware that we may be falling short of some of those goals and those aspirations, and that can lead to that sense of threat, that we're not enough. And it feeds that culture of do more to be more. Now, that's really relevant in sport, which is quite outcome focused. But it's also relevant in day-to-day life when we are wanting to feel that we are being respected by others, that we're seen to be doing a good job, that we are, if you like, acceptable. And that means that that reset mode is often underutilized. And arguably for us to thrive in life, for athletes to excel and to feel well, then these systems, the get, threat, and reset, need to be balanced. So there's something here about, yes, athletes needing to ensure that they use the reset mode, and they're quite good at doing that in the sense that they recognize the importance for physical conditioning of rest and recovery. Now, there's a bit of work that needs to be done in terms of the psychological reset as well, which is important and can sometimes be neglected. So we can actually learn, I think, from the example that athletes might set around the importance of recovery and rest, that we can start to apply in our lives so we can continue to thrive.
So what was it about the idea of the tree that bends that appealed to you? Because it's an East African saying, so maybe you should give us the full saying.
Yes, the wind does not break the tree that bends. And I've been fortunate in my academic work to do a lot of international collaborations, as you mentioned, for example, with the World Health Organization, evaluating psychological interventions in humanitarian settings. So I have been blessed to have the opportunity to collaborate with colleagues in Uganda, in Rwanda, in Sierra Leone. And I'm always very interested in language that is used to capture states of illness, but also states of resilience and wellness. And I just loved that Tanzanian proverb whenever I heard it, the wind does not break the tree that bends. So that was something that had stayed with me. And whenever I was thinking about psychological flexibility, I thought, wow, the tree is actually a very powerful metaphor for these key components of psychological flexibility. So if we think about the anatomy of the tree, the roots keep it anchored in the location where it is. And we, I think, need to be anchored in the time and place in which our lives are unfolding. Too often we get caught up in this mental time travel, and listeners will relate to this, where our minds race back to the past and regrets that we might have, or difficult memories of past times that are distressing for us. But we can also be zipped into the future, worrying about how things might be next week, in 3 months' time, in a year's time. So there's something about being able to recognize that those thoughts, those memories, they come and go, we endure, and about coming back to the here and now and getting anchored in this time and this place. So anchored is an important part of psychological flexibility, represented by the roots. Now, the trunk of a tree needs to be willing to sway in the wind, to absorb the wind's energy so that it can transform that and sway back, come back to center. So tree trunks need to be willing to sway. And that's another important element of psychological flexibility, this willingness to lean into difficult thoughts and feelings rather than trying to suppress or avoid or get rid of them. Because if I said to you, Andrew, don't think about a pink elephant, what do you end up thinking about?
A pink elephant.
Right. And it works. That's a very trivial example, but, well, don't think about those difficult memories from the past. What we serve to do is paradoxically keep them in our mental headspace and trying to get rid of them. So there's this willingness, if you like, to show up to difficult thoughts and feelings. That's the trunk of the tree. And then finally, the crown of the tree is the powerhouse of the tree. That's where it gets its energy. It photosynthesizes through the leaves, and that generates that energy, which is converted into fuel for the tree to grow and to develop. So I thought that was a beautiful way of capturing this third element of psychological flexibility, about being empowered. What does that mean? Well, empowered to act in line with our sense of purpose that mobilizes us, that energizes us, to be empowered to act in line with our values, those qualities that we want to shine through in how we are in the world. So the tree, the roots, the trunk, and the crown represent the anchored, willing, and empowered elements of psychological flexibility.
So what's the difference between psychological flexibility and resilience?
Yeah, resilience is an interesting concept, and it's one that we recognize, we talk about so much. Interestingly, there was an article in the New York Times in 2015 that really talked about how hollow the term resilience had become, because it was being used in so many different fields, in so many different ways, that it maybe lost some of that specificity. And yeah, this kind of idea that it was a hollow term. And when we think about the concept of resilience, Andrew, resilience can be the continued functioning following an adversity with no impact on that functioning. So we can continue to just perform as well as we have ever done, in spite of the fact that we have experienced difficult life circumstance, like a divorce, for example, or an economic downturn, that we continue to function as we always did. And that's sometimes referred to as robust resilience, that you've been unaffected in any way by that adversity. There is another type of resilience, though, that suggests that you can have a dip in your functioning following the adversity, and then you can quickly recover to function at the level that you functioned at before. And that's sometimes referred to as rebound resilience. So it's that idea of bouncing back after initially struggling. So there's that. And then there's also this idea of post-traumatic growth, where you might have experienced adversity, and as a result of your experiences and how you respond to those experiences, you could indeed come back stronger in certain capabilities than you were before that adversity. So you've grown as a consequence of what you've been through. So you can see that these ideas of, well, robust resilience, rebound resilience, post-traumatic growth, the problem with them is that they're all indexed off an experience of adversity. So the question for the listeners is, well, does resilience actually exist in the absence of experiencing any adversity? Do you see that conceptually there's a challenge around anchoring this idea of resilience to an experience of adversity? And I think psychological flexibility is relevant, is potentially beneficial, whether there are indeed adversities, small T traumas, large T traumas, and whether there isn't any of that experience. I think it's an important concept for thriving.
But do we actually need resilience in the good times? Don't we just sort of put our feet up and enjoy them? We don't actually need any resilience to keep us on the deck chair beside the pool.
Yeah, and this is the conceptual conundrum about, well, does resilience appear out of nowhere once the adversity happens, or has it been lying dormant, waiting, if you like, for the adversity to come along? So that is conceptually one of the big issues. And there's now growing recognition, Andrew, that resilience isn't an outcome, which maybe 30 or 40 years ago people would have assumed it was. It was, well, a point in time, how you were functioning. Gosh, you're doing quite well in spite of the adversity, you're resilient. To now being much more open to the idea that resilience could be a process. So it's a dynamic process. It's an interaction between the person, their experiences, whether that be adversity or not, and how they then respond both emotionally and behaviorally in the aftermath of the experience. So yeah, resilience as a process, that's where the focus is now sitting.
Because you talk about three types of resilience. You talk about unhindered, resolved, and enhanced. Tell me about that.
Yeah, that's the terminology, if you like, that I use in the book. The idea of the robust resilience is the unhindered. And then you've got that idea about, well, rebound resilience, which is, okay, you've been hindered, but you've come back. And then the post-traumatic growth is this idea of, well, coming back stronger as a consequence of the difficulties you've experienced.
I mean, I've just thought of a situation where the opposite of adversity, success, can actually be a little bit undermining. I mean, people who've won great prizes, like, I don't know, the Booker Prize, then are terrified about writing their next novel because how can you possibly live up to that one? So it's not necessarily adversity. It can be success that actually you need to have psychological flexibility to deal with.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a concept called the arrival fallacy, which is where we have had our sights set on a particular achievement or a particular event. So the Olympic cycles or the Commonwealth Games cycles are good examples of this, or the World Cup in football, where you've got 4-year cycles and you've been preparing, you've been focused, your training has been geared towards performing well at that event. And of course, disaster can strike and you might get injured, and you're then dealing with the adversity that can come as a result of that. But you may perform and perform incredibly well. You could medal at the Olympics. You could win the World Cup. And then you're left to kind of deal with the emotional aftermath of that. There's a sense of, I have arrived, my big objective, I have achieved. And there's elation, there's joy, there's triumph. And then suddenly, within a relatively brief period of time, that all dissipates. And you're left with a sense of emptiness, hollowness about, well, what next? Your sights have been trained so specifically on this event. You've achieved it. And now what do you use to orientate how you're going to move forward in life? So that can be very discombobulating. And people talk about, that idea of post-Olympic blues whenever they're left to adjust to the aftermath following their biggest triumph. And again, that's the get mode. It's a kind of, well, what's the next unachieved thing? It's kind of like, oh, yeah, that's grand. I've done that, but I need to get my sights trained on the next thing. And I'm not sure what that next thing might be.
Let's look at some of the ideas of psychological flexibility. I mean, I think possibly one of the most important ones is know your limits. So tell me about that.
Yes, I have noted social media is replete with influencers who are very compelling with the messaging that they give. And it's this kind of no limits, and you've got to sacrifice yourself on the altar of success. And people see that and they think, yeah, that's what I need to do. I need to work hard, no limits. And instead, I advocate a slightly different approach, and it's know your limits. Know your limits. Not no limits, but know your limits, and work flexibly within them. We have to take care of ourselves if we're going to continue to take care of business. In terms of sustainable performance, it's really important to get balance between those get, threat, and reset modes. So yeah, I'm a big proponent of the importance of reset and about that being used to help sustain our efforts in the longer term.
But how do you actually know what your limits are?
Yeah, I think experience can help. I think resources, and I hope that the Tree That Bends is a helpful resource for allowing people to reflect a little on their own lives and learning from those experiences. But there's a strategy, a technique that I talk about in the book called pre-commitment pledge. Now, pre-commitment pledges are us in advance setting a choice that we are going to make in advance of us achieving or not achieving a particular goal. So I might recognize 2.5 years ago that I was setting out to write a book, which subsequently became The Tree That Bends. Now, I knew that this was going to be an intense experience, one that would challenge me, challenge my relationships potentially, my ability, if you like, to stay centered and to stay balanced between my get, threat, and reset. And I needed to set in advance something that I would do after the project had completed, which would allow me to engage in that reset. So I had committed to taking a 12-month career break from my university work, which would allow me time to reflect on the journey that I'd been on, to engage in some travel, to also commit to doing some leisure activity. I'm a big fan of cycling. So I had planned to take a bit of time to also work on my fitness and participate in a cycle event. And I'm very proud to say I completed the Wicklow 200 cycle event there at the weekend, which was an endurance ride. So the pre-commitment pledge was saying, okay, at the end of that time period, once the book is submitted, you're going to take the time to look after yourself, to access that reset mode. Because I knew fine well, once I got the book finished, I would then be drawn into that get mode about, well, what next? What next? Let's keep going. There's momentum here. There are other ideas that you want to develop. So it's that having that wisdom to know that we need to make choices now that will be better for our future selves, and our future selves will be able to appreciate at the time that they're making those choices. So pre-commitment pledge is a contract that you set with yourself, a pact. Once this gets done, you're going to do this, and you're going to have to recognize that at the time you commit to making this choice, your mind will be telling you not to do it, right? That your mind will be in get mode, and there's a likelihood that you will be pushing yourself to do more. So pre-commitment pledges can be very helpful, I think, for accessing that reset mode.
So I think what you seem to be saying that we need to accept our thoughts, even if we don't particularly like them. The same with our emotions and the sensations that come up in our body that we can't prevent, rather than trying to manage them in some kind of way or avoid them. So how do we do that, and why is it so important for psychological flexibility?
Yeah. So this speaks really to that being willing element of the flexibility that I mentioned, the trunk of the tree, the swaying, if you like, the absorbing of the experience rather than resisting. So I have an approach that I talk about in the book, which is called POPLAR, and it's an acronym POPLAR. And the first step of POPLAR, the first P, is to, pick up that an experience has provoked an emotional reaction in you. So that's about us doing some noticing around the emotional reaction that we might be having in a situation. The O is to observe the most prominent emotion that might be there. And the invitation is to give it a label. It could be anger, could be frustration, could be sadness. So it's about, okay, this situation has provoked a reaction in me. Let's observe what the most prominent emotion is. And you could even score that on a scale of 0, the lowest you've ever felt that particular emotion, 10 being the max that you've ever experienced. So the second P is pinpoint the initial urge that you have to react to that emotion. So if you're experiencing anger, you might be having urges to react, to strike back. It could be writing a strongly worded email off the back of a difficult email that you've experienced, or arguing the case in front of another person. Just pinpoint the initial urge that you have to react. The L is locate where in your body you are actually experiencing the felt sensation of that emotion. So for some people, if it's worry or anxiety, it might be butterflies in the tummy. For other people, it could be a tightness in the chest. If it's anger, sometimes people talk about, the pressure in their head, or indeed a sensation of energy all through their body. Okay, so just locate where in the body the felt experience of the emotion is. And then the A is assign physical characteristics to the felt experience of that emotion. So if that pressure in your head that can be there with anger had a color, what color would it be? If it had a weight, what weight would that felt experience have? If it had a texture, what texture might the anger have? Is it spiky? Is it slippery? If it had a temperature, is it hot? Is it cold? And even energy, if that was an energy, how would you describe that energy that you're feeling in your head? And then the final part of POPLAR is the R, and it's recognizing that you can hold that felt experience of the emotion in this moment, and that you can choose to respond in a way that is in line with your values, how you want to be in the world, the person you want to be. At the end of that exercise, Andrew, I'll say to the client, now, you did have that initial urge to react, and thank you for sharing that with me. And it's important for us to recognize that that was there. So you had that initial urge. But through that process, we've also generated another type of response, one that's potentially more in line with your values and how you want to be in the world. The choice is yours as to how you respond. It's your choice as to whether you go with that urge or you go with that response that's more value consistent. And I empower people to make that choice. I would say anecdotally, I don't have hard and fast evidence for this, Andrew, but 90% of the people after that process would go with their value consistent response as opposed to that initial urge to react. So that's just one strategy that we can use to help people develop that willingness to be with difficult emotions, to make space for them, to hold them, to not be dictated to by them, to recognize that they can have the emotion doesn't have them.
So let's go back through that again. Poplar, P for pick up the experience, the reaction, O for observe, P for pinpoint the critical urge, L location, where in your body is it, A for assign a particular characteristic. Now, why is it important to think that anger is red or sadness is blue? How does that actually change anything?
It engages this process of curiosity rather than judgment. So often when we have emotions like anger, fear, or sadness, we can then start to have secondary emotions based on the fact that we've experienced that emotion. So you can judge yourself for getting angry, or you can criticize yourself for being sad. And what we're doing with the, assign physical characteristics is helping the person to engage a sense of curiosity, to explore it, to lean into it, to recognize that they can hold it in this second, they can hold it in the next second. And it helps to break that chain of these primary emotions becoming secondary emotions when we then start to have judgments about the fact that it's there. We're hardwired to experience these emotions. And perhaps that kind of idea about the R that you were just about to get to, about recognize that you can hold the emotion and that you can respond in a way that's consistent with your values, is about, let's have the emotion in the service of doing what it is that's important. My sense of purpose, my personal value.
Because I think what's actually really important for people to realize is that these sort of automatic reactions that happen when you get, I call it the golden gap, normally the whistle blows and off we go, a bit like a train leaving a station. And as we know, once the train's left the station, it ain't coming back. And the whistle is the trigger that we get, and we go off on the same old train tracks, which sort of worked when we were kids. So our automatic reaction is probably a trauma response or a maladapted childhood way of dealing with something like, throwing your hands up in horror or going quiet or going on the attack. These are not things you actually choose. You have them thrust upon you from your old synapses that were put in when you were incredibly young. And they sort of worked, but the things that get sort of stuck are the things that sort of work. If they completely fail, you give up on them. But if they sort of work, they become very sticky.
Yeah, you're right. And, that's the important element of this context, that in some situations, a particular response to emotion might have served us well, and it gets reinforced as a go-to strategy. But we then start to become blind to the new contexts, the new opportunities, the new learning that can go on. And just to riff on your really lovely metaphor about the trains, it's almost like psychological flexibility is helping us to see the route map. I'm always intrigued whenever I'm on the tube to see the beautiful maps of all the different lines intersecting and overlapping and the different locations that they serve. Psychological flexibility, I think, helps to give us that bird's eye view of the different routes and where those might take us, and affording us opportunities to engage choice in how we choose to travel, right? Rather than being swept along in a particular direction.
And the problem with the old habits is we think there's only one way to get to King's Cross Station, so to speak, using a London example. Whereas, in fact, there are many ways to get to King's Cross Station. And we could choose to go one that isn't quite so draining on us. And I think that's psychological flexibility, to be able to actually choose where you're going to go rather than, not where you're going to go, is how you're going to go there. Because when you're a child, you have very limited resources. You don't have a car and keys or a wallet with credit cards in it. You've got far more resources now, far more experience. You don't have to go the same way to King's Cross Station. Other routes are available.
Yeah, and I love the quote that's often attributed to Eleanor Roosevelt, and it's that idea of if you only do what you've always done, you'll only get what you've always gotten. And I like that because it's affording us an opportunity to think about the joy of being playful, the joy of trying different things. if we're not prepared to change up, then we are, I think, bound to some of those very familiar past ways of doing things. So yeah, it's incumbent on us to utilize the joy of flexibility to make choices that may afford us to live a life that has more vitality and brings with it more varied rewards. Yeah.
So how do we bend then?
Yeah, I think it is about practice. Psychological flexibility is about using strategies to help us to be more anchored and willing and empowered. So, for example, mindfulness practice, it's not a panacea. It's not going to cure all ills, but it can certainly help us to shift our relationship with the present moment and also the thoughts and emotions that can show up in the present moment. So mindfulness practice, I talk about in the book as being a key way of developing those skills around being anchored and willing. But there are also techniques like anchoring statements. So be where your feet are is a great example of an anchoring statement, and it's used in a sporting context. So Steve Hansen, the former coach of the New Zealand All Blacks rugby team that won the World Cup, he would often say to his players, be where your feet are, not where your head's at. The Ireland rugby team, they talk about winning the moment in front of your face, because people could get very caught up on the fact that they've just conceded a try and get very caught up in judgments around the fact that that had happened, or indeed too high on their own supply if they had just scored a try. Okay, well, that's done. Win the moment in front of your face. So in my work with clients, I've adapted that a bit. Andrew, I talk about, well, live the moment in front of your face. This is where life is unfolding. This is where the opportunities to feel contentment and fulfillment are. You know, fulfillment is the promise that tomorrow can never deliver. It's about today. It's about how we feel in this moment, in the next moment. So anchoring statements are another way of utilizing that ability to be anchored. In terms of being empowered, it is about clarifying what our values are, and there are exercises that I use with clients to help them get more in touch with their own values. If you like, I could talk about one such example that might be helpful for the listener.
Maybe we'll do that later, but I'd just like to pull up one of the ways that you did do about bending, not blending. Asking yourself, which options are we willing to consider for blending well-being and achievement? And that seems like quite a good thing to be thinking about. Which options and how are they going to blend well-being and achievement? So talk me through that.
Yeah. So the part of the metaphor that I really wanted to expand on in the book was, yes, the anatomy of the tree. Okay, that's really helpful for understanding psychological flexibility about roots, trunk, crown, anchored, willing, and empowered. Okay, and strategies and techniques for people to develop their own flexible mind, as I call it in the book. But then it's, well, what does that flexibility afford us? What does that flexibility afford the tree? And that's where I think it's helpful to come back to those ideas of get, threat, and reset. So let's think about the tree just initially, and then I'll come to your point, your question really about, well, blending achievement and well-being. If you think about the tree in springtime and summer, it is a very productive time for the tree. Its get mode is very highly activated. It's photosynthesizing. It's producing the fuel it needs. So spring, summer, tree in get mode. But the tree also needs to be sensitive to the risk of storm and invest energy in responding to storms. It needs to protect itself from infestation from bugs that can kill a tree. So its threat mode needs to be activated during storms or the risk of infestation. And then in autumn and winter, the tree drops its leaves, it goes dormant, it has that period of reset, and that's the revitalization. It's the anatomy of the tree that allows it to shift its functioning through those different modes. So flexibility affords us the opportunity to flexibly move between those different modes. So if we recognize that we're in get mode, okay, that's important. Why are we in get mode? Okay. If we're in threat mode, okay, that's good to notice. Why are we in threat mode? Okay, that's informative. Are we in reset mode? If we're not, okay, that's important to notice. So in the concluding part of the book, Andrew, I talk about this 2-phase process, which is about blending these efforts, if you like, to perform, but also to feel well, to excel and to feel well. So the 2-stage process is, number 1, well, notice what motivational mode you're in. Ask yourself that question. I ask myself this question through the day. Well, am I in get mode right now? Am I in threat mode? Am I in reset mode? Okay. The next question is, well, what advantages is being in this mode now affording me? So what advantages are being in this mode affording me? The next question is, well, what drawbacks or disadvantages might being in this mode be affording me or impacting me? And within that, it's, well, do I want to stay in this mode or do I want to shift? Is it going to be important in my effort to sustain my well-being to stay here or to shift? And then the second phase. So the first phase is, well, what mode am I in right now? What are the benefits? What are the costs? Do I wish to stay in this in my efforts to thrive, which is the concept that's talked about through the book? The second phase is, okay, utilize your flexibility skills about being anchored, empowered, and willing to shift if you need to shift, or to continue in that mode if doing so helps you to achieve valued ends. So it's about helping us understand that those flexibility skills, having a flexible mind, allows us to flexibly move between our get, threat, and our reset modes. And in the concluding part of the book, I guide the reader through this 2-phase process that helps them to make more informed choices around that.
So in a moment, we're going to be looking at a letter and seeing if a bit of resilience and emotional flexibility and psychological flexibility would be helpful.
The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall. Please follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and visit our website, andrewgmarshall.com/podcast, where you can join our supporters club and unlock bonus material and other benefits.
My men's retreat runs from Sunday the 28th of September to Wednesday the 1st of October in the woods just outside Berlin, Germany. Step out of your daily stress. Take stock of where your life is going and deepen your relationship with yourself and other men. One of the reasons everyone feels more anxious is not just the fast-changing world, but how we've become more isolated. In particular, we are cut off from the wisdom and support of other men, mostly because we find it difficult to open up and be truly vulnerable with each other. In my 4-day workshop with a group of like-minded men, we can focus on what it means to be a man today and how we can support our sons to become balanced men. It will be a truly transformative experience, and I would like to share it with you. You can find out more about the beautiful location, the seminar house itself, and the costs on my website, andrewgmarshall.com. Click on the button Men's Retreat. Do it now because we've almost filled half the places.
Podbean, your message amplified.
Ready to share your message with the world? Start your podcast journey with Podbean.
Podbean, the AI-powered all-in-one podcast platform.
Thousands of businesses and enterprises trust Podbean to launch their podcasts.
Use Podbean to record your podcast.
Use Podbean AI to optimize your podcast.
Use Podbean AI to turn your blog into a podcast.
Use Podbean to distribute your podcast everywhere.
Launch your podcast on Podbean today.
At Bright Horizons, infants discover first steps, toddlers discover independence, and preschoolers discover bold ideas. Our dedicated teachers and discovery-driven curriculum nurture curiosity, inspire creativity, and build lasting confidence so your child is ready to take on the world. Come visit one of our Bright Horizons centers in the Bay Area and see for yourself how we turn wonder into wisdom. Schedule your visit today at brighthorizons.com.
If you'd like to write a letter into us, it's very simple. Go to my website, andrewgmarshall.com, and look for the podcast section. You'll find Participate in the Programme. My husband and I have been together since our early 20s and married for almost 20 years. We have 2 children who have special educational needs. My husband is hard-working and driven, and I think it's fair to say that I'm cut from the same cloth. For a long time, I've been aware that something is not right deep down, and I've been on a journey to understand. I've realized that we have a high-functioning marriage, but something inside is dead. It looks okay on the surface, but really, it's like a zombie going through the motions. My childhood taught me to put my head down, work hard, and keep going. I've started to see someone to think about how my past is impacting me, which is throwing up lots of food for thought. However, I'm aware that my husband has a lot of trauma too, but does not really have anybody with whom he can talk, although he has suggested couple therapy in the past. So many people are relying on me, and sometimes it feels like I have 3 children rather than 2, and I don't want to leave my marriage and find someone else, but I don't want to burden my children with my unlived life. I feel hopeless and I'm just procrastinating. What should I do?
Well, I'm glad that the person has seen fit to write in and to share their experience, and I applaud them for their courage and their willingness to do that. And yeah, I empathize with them around that sense of hopelessness and the concern that they're experiencing. It's great as well that she has shown that willingness to reach out and receive support and has engaged in that process of therapy with the therapist. I would be a very strong advocate of couples work. I'm trained in emotion-focused couples therapy, which was pioneered by Sue Johnston. Sue sadly passed away, I think, late last year, but she has decades of work that she really utilized to produce resources and to come up with these principles that have governed emotion-focused couples therapy. And within the couples therapy work, there's an opportunity to think about the cycles that can develop in how we interact with our partners. And sometimes those cycles take on a very characteristic pattern that are based really on what are referred to as secondary emotions. And secondary emotions might be things like frustration, anger, annoyance, jealousy, that sometimes are easier for us to go to than actually accessing the primary emotions that sit deep down underneath those secondary emotions. Those could be about fear or sadness or loneliness that have developed through our life experiences that maybe are reflected perhaps in our early attachment relationships with our caregivers and the fears that might have developed around that. So what happens is that couples over time can relate to each other and get into this cycle of responding to these secondary emotions without really accessing the primary emotions that sit underneath that. And that can lead to very characteristic cycles of interacting. And Sue Johnson talks about the idea that sometimes we can be a withdrawer. We withdraw from interacting with our partner. And we prefer, if you like, to seek solace or to retreat versus the pursuer. So in some situations, a partner might be the one who's seeking out the interaction or confrontation with their partner. So you can get this withdrawer-pursuer pattern that emerges. But sometimes it's withdrawer-withdrawer. And yeah, there's this disengagement. The distance between the people starts to grow. And the real focus in emotion-focused couples therapy is about that bond, trying to strengthen the bond between people. And that involves accessing that vulnerability that sits with those primary emotions. So I would be very keen for listeners and for the person writing the letter to consider if there are relationship difficulties, that emotion-focused couples therapy or couples therapy more broadly can be very helpful. And Andrew, within that, each individual will have an opportunity to have sessions individually with the therapist before the contract for the couples work is progressed. So part of the assessment work is meeting, yes, with the couple, but then allowing space to meet individually with both so that they have an opportunity to say their piece on the understanding that there are no secrets, that what is shared with the therapist is there for the therapist to also draw upon in the couples therapy. So I would hope that that could be beneficial for both the person writing the letter and her partner.
So I've got 2 comments to make. Plus, I'm going to agree that I think that you should grab the idea of couples therapy, because being able to talk to each other more is going to always be helpful, and a third party can help with that. But there are 2 things that I want to think about. I don't want to burden my children with my unlived life. I sort of know where this is coming from, because do you know the analyst James Hollis, a Jungian analyst?
Yes, I have read his book. Is it The Middle Passage?
That's one of his books. But in another one, which I think is, the name of it's not going to come to me, but I'll put it in the show notes, talks about the biggest burden we can give our children is our unlived lives. And I think that one of the things that he's saying that doesn't come across in that quote, because I've interviewed him, in fact, twice on this podcast. So if you want to listen to James Hollis, who I would thoroughly recommend, look back and you'll find 2 episodes that I've done with him. But he's talking about the unconscious unlived life. So if we're aware that there's an unlived life that we're not living, that is actually far less burdensome and one that's conscious than one that is unconscious, that you're not aware that there's something you want to do, or it's so deep in your unconscious that you're not really 100% aware of it. Maybe you're subconscious. So I think the fact that you're doing a lot of investigation is going to take a lot of power out of that unlived life. So I want to sort of pull down the threat level a little bit there. And the second thing I want to do, which I think fits in a lot with what Ross is saying, is about being actually anchored in this moment now, because I think you are looking way into the future at the moment. You're thinking about what the outcome might be for your children. You're thinking about what the outcome might be for the couple therapy you're going to have. And it's always very tempting to go rushing into the future, because it sort of makes us feel a little bit less helpless now. But actually, what do we know about how your therapy is going to go? We have no idea. It might be absolutely wonderful. It might be a disaster. We have no idea, or it might have no impact at all. So what's the point of trying to work out where we're going to get at the end of it? I mean, there's 3 million things that could happen to your children between now and when they become adults. We can't possibly think about them all. And it's actually taking us away from what should we do now? How do we live now in a more flexible kind of way?
Yeah. And what I might add there, Andrew, is the hopelessness issue. Hope is there within couples and couples work. I've seen incredible progress made with couples when all seemed lost. So I want to just reassure folk that relationships, they're not broken. It's that they get stuck, and that the process of therapy is about helping people to get unstuck. And that can indeed be a resurgence, a change within the relationship for the better. It can indeed, for some clients, be facilitating a separation. Unfortunately, not all relationships are salvageable, but the process can be helpful for allowing people to feel contained and supported and helping to get unstuck along the way.
And in the meantime, what I always say to people is don't think about the outcome. Think about improving the communication between the two of you now. So focus on learning the skills so that you can have a better conversation about what the potential outcome might be. I hope that's been helpful to you. I'm afraid we had technical problems right at the very end of the recording, and therefore it was not possible to record some bonus material. So I thought, what can I do? And what I've decided to do is I found the quote that I was talking about from James Hollis, and the book is Living an Examined Life, Wisdom for the Second Half of the Journey. And if you'd like to hear me read part of that essay that James has written and talk about it, you can do that in the bonus material. And if you want to hear the bonus material, you can subscribe directly via Apple or Spotify. And if you want to become a supporter of The Meaningful Life and unlock the bonus material this way, here are the details.
You've been listening to The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall. You can follow Andrew on Twitter, like him on Facebook, and please leave a review wherever you consume your podcasts. Making, editing, and distributing The Meaningful Life comes with substantial costs, and we'd like to ask for your help. Visit our website, andrewgmarshall.com/podcast, where you can join our supporters club and unlock bonus material for every program, send in a letter to be discussed by Andrew and his guests, and join a community of other people seeking to make their life meaningful. At the gold level, you get even more benefits. Production of The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall is by Michael Dooney. Social media by Madeleine Healy. Sound engineering and theme tune by Sebastian de la Luz Mendoza. And I'm Susie Colick. Please tell your friends and spread the word. Thank you.
At Bright Horizons, infants discover first steps, toddlers discover independence, and preschoolers discover bold ideas. Our dedicated teachers and discovery-driven curriculum nurture curiosity, inspire creativity, and build lasting confidence so your child is ready to take on the world. Come visit one of our Bright Horizons centers in the Bay Area and see for yourself how we turn wonder into wisdom. Schedule your visit today at brighthorizons.com.
Visit your local Safeway to get great savings on delicious summer favorites and essentials. This week at Safeway, get USDA Choice Beef Ribeye Steak Bone-In Mega Packs for $8.77 per pound with digital coupon, limit 2 packs. Plus, get red cherries for just $1.77 per pound with digital coupon, limit 4 pounds. Also this week, don't miss out on sweet corn for just 7 cents each with digital coupon, limit 10 items. Visit Safeway.com for additional ways to save.